I'm the Senior Vice President of the London Center and co-founder, along with our President, Herb London, who is now in New York. The topic of conversation for today is what U.S. policy should be with regards to Qatar. There are countries in the Middle East, including Egypt, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, that have all chosen to what I'll call a boycott Qatar due to their support of terrorism, as well as or terrorist organizations, as well as Iran. So the question now becomes: should these support the boycott as well and join in, or not? There are certain questions that I'm going to pose to the panelists and ask them to address, amongst many others, things that they want to address on their own. The question becomes: is this something that the U.S. should take a hard stand on, set our own policy, or is this something that we should follow our allies in the region? If they have already chosen to support this this boycott, then should we jump in on that? Or is this, in essence, following suit? Or is this something that we should proactively take a leadership role on and play as great a role in this discussion as everybody else in the region? That would be question number one. Question number two, in particular, is well, considering that we have a base in Qatar right now, can we join the boycott, or does that not affect it at all? Maybe that shouldn't play any role in it. The question, of course, becomes: if it did play a role, and maybe one could make the case that we would have to then move the base. Is that even feasible? And how long would it take? By the time that we move the base, maybe the discussion would be over. So these are all questions that really need to be discussed. Our panelists, and I'm going to introduce in order of speaking. We have Ambassador Jim Woolsey, who is former director of the CIA and a London Center senior fellow. We'll start off. Then we'll have Captain Pete O'Brien. Pete spent 30+ years in naval intelligence. Is our senior intelligence fellow at the London Center as well. And then batting cleanup is Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, London Center Vice President. Spends much of his time, as I'm sure everybody here has seen him at least once or twice on Fox News, or causing problems on MSNBC,
yes,
or the like. With that, Jim.
I want to just say briefly, this is a complicated problem. One major reason it's complicated is what you said. Air bases are not that easy to pick up and move, and that facility is important to us in the region. And to be candid about it, one might speak about it publicly in more muted tones, but it's within the area that we're talking here. I think it's fair to say that that's a major consideration. It is for the whole country, for the United States, not just for the Air Force. Second, the primary instrumentality of trouble in that part of the world, as far as I'm concerned, is Iran, and its primary instrumentality is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It is 4 to 5 times the size of ISIS. It's the only terrorist organization that I know of that has a special forces and a Marine Corps and 20 divisions in its army and a navy. It somehow, no, it doesn't have a navy, it has a Marine Corps and special forces and infantry, 20 divisions. So we, if one looks at, and the Basiji, who are the instrumentality for massacring kids in the streets if they should demonstrate. And I think that we really need to pay very close attention to what Iran is doing and using the IRGC as its instrumentality here in the aftermath of yet, but as ISIS has been dealt some substantial setbacks, that opens up more area for influence of the IRGC. And I think we need to pay attention to what is the main problem. The main problem, as far as I'm concerned, is Iran. The main instrumentality is all of the different parts of the IRGC. Our principal effort, however we deal with the diplomatic issues involving Qatar, which are important, our primary emphasis should be to figure out how to work with the other countries in the region as well as those outside the region to limit and hopefully deal some severe blows, not necessarily kinetic ones, but to do some severe blows to Iran and the IRGC. I'll close by saying my favorite severe blow to Iran is exactly like my favorite severe blow to Russia, which is low oil prices. And we can talk about how to get them down to $35 to $40 a barrel and keep them there, and to the total despair the Iranian and Russian governments. And if I would submit that under current circumstances, if the Iranian and Russian governments are unhappy, we must be doing something right.
Okay. Do you think that the U.S. should play a proactive role in this?
Well, we ought to talk to our allies, countries that we're close to, like Egypt, and make a decision about how to handle this. Some of this, there's a bunch of things going on, and there may be some aspects of this we want to work with the allies on, and others that we would be inclined to stand back from. But the main point I wanted to make is I don't think this is the major issue for the Middle East now or in the likely near or in the mid future. It's an interesting and important problem. We've got to deal with it, but let's not let the ball slip away when the ball we've got to control is Iran.
If I can just jump on something the rest of you said, the real issue is Iran, and so I think the other side to look at this is that dispute between the rest of the GCC and Qatar may provide us an opportunity to essentially poke Iran in the side. Qatar, and you all know, just for folks listening, in case they haven't been keeping up on things, the issue of oil prices and energy prices drives directly at the sort of the backbone of Qatar. Qatar splits about a 30 or 40 trillion cubic meter natural gas field with Iran, and that represents just a huge amount of cash flow. I think they have the highest per capita income in the world. So if you can somehow use this to pry Qatar apart, and do that by lowering energy prices and affecting you can really hit them very quickly, and also possibly use this as a way to make Iran weaker. There's a couple of things. Just throw in, by the way, the U.S. presence in Qatar is centered at Al Udeid Airfield. There is an actual Air Force wing there, heavy lift, but there's also the Combined Air Operations Center for all of Central Command, and the USN Forward headquarters. These are very well developed, large pieces. They can be moved. It's not impossible, but it's something you have to think through. It's not something you just go and do. So arguably one of the things that ought to come out of this whole process is perhaps a look by the Pentagon at figuring out how to become a little bit more agile at some of these forward bases, how to maybe slowly start reducing the footprint in Al Udeid and distributing it and distributing their command capabilities to other facilities around the region. But I think the thing that the ambassador said there is critical, and we need to keep going back to it. The issue really is Iran. And so can we use the problem right now between Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Bahrain, etc., and Qatar, can we use that in some way to pry them apart and get Iran essentially pushed back into the corner? And I think that's the way we need to look at this thing. And I think that one, the oil prices, and the second part of it being the expat community in Qatar. Qatar, there's about almost 3 million people in Qatar. Only about 350,000 of them are Qataris. The rest are all workers. They're all coming from someplace else. So if the United States, the GCC, etc., go talk to those other countries, go talk to the Sri Lankans, go talk to the Pakistanis, use what influence we have there to try to affect that expat community. Perhaps there's another pry bar essentially that we have there. We can direct at Qatar and get Qatar and Iran essentially moving apart rather than moving forward. But I just kind of offer that is this may be an opportunity. It's not necessarily just a dispute. It may be an opportunity for us to reshuffle the deck a little bit in the region.
How many Qataris did you say? I'm sorry.
I think it's
about 275.
275. Okay, yes, right. As opposed to 2.5, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5 million expats. Is that about right?
I mean, not to get off topic, but if we were to spread the base out, and we were to restructure it, so therefore it's not all in one facility, what would that look like? I know we're getting off topic.
Well, really, the trick here is that you can move the aircraft and the actual physical part of this process can move to any other large airbase, and there's a number of large airfields in the region that can support this kind of thing. And if you go back and look at Desert Storm or OIF, and you look at the real buildup of forces, we were using a number of airfields all around the region. So you can physically move those aircraft other places, assuming that we've negotiated agreements, etc. There's lots of places you can move those folks. The issue would be the Combined Air Operations Center and the CENTCOM Forward Command Center, which are really communications nodes. And the real trick then becomes taking those key pieces of command and control nodes and putting them someplace where you can latch them together electronically. That's non-trivial. So it's really a question of making sure you have the right gear and you've walked through the procedures and you've reviewed your current procedures and adjusted them for now a distributed base rather than the current arrangement. All of which can be done. We've done it in the Pacific. We're doing it in the Pacific. But you need to actually do it. It's one of these things where you can draw it on the board. It all makes sense. But you need to actually practice it. So it can be done in a whole bunch of different ways. It's not going to look any one particular way. But what you're going to wind up with is a number of different facilities, each doing pieces of what are now being done. And then the communications equipment at each one of those places so that they're linked together.
Got it. There's so many more questions to ask on that one.
I was just going to say something, if I may. I don't think the United States should be worried about the base at all. Although Qatar is not going to challenge the base. It's like entity owes the bank money. It's the entity that is more powerful than the bank. Qatar is not going to challenge the base. I take the ambassador's points very seriously, of course, and the base is very important. UAE has already offered an alternative. But I can assure you at this time that Qatar will not ever challenge that base.
But we could use that place to pry bar.
Of course, without question.
What about the Turks or Iranians, though? Because they have clearly stated that they're going to go into Qatar.
The Turks have a background that they want to play a role in the region, very similar to what Erdogan has been trying to achieve in other places in the region. But having 3,000 troops in Qatar is nothing more than a drop in the bucket and a signal they will not again challenge either the United States for sure or any of the GCC countries. And I think the key element, and I agree with the ambassador completely, is the issue of Iran and how do you deal with that and how do you pry them apart. And my 2 cents worth is it needs to be done in coordination and very carefully. But I think we would make a mistake if we start changing policy right now in mid-road. I mean, does anybody disagree that Qatar has been a negative influence in this whole terrorism issue? I mean, the evidence is all out there in many different ways that they have financed terrorism, that they have been playing a role in different places that is neither in the interest of the United States nor in the interest of the stability of the region. And they have been doing that for a reason. I mean, there's a whole background reason for why the Al Thani family, and it's not really Qatar, it's not the 275,000, it's just the family that is doing this. And everybody gave them a lot of leeway, and we sort of closed our eyes, all of us. And now it's time, and I think President Trump has put a major priority on the issue of cutting financing for terrorism and being able to call a spade, and that's, I think, what's happening. I think it would be a mistake if we back off. That's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. Tony?
To continue the conversation, thank you all for coming today. It's good to be here to have this point of issue. I think we have to look at this as a large game of empire chess, and those pieces on the board won't necessarily respond to the king or queen directly. So I think the clarity of mission and thought is important to the strategic thinking we must now introduce to the situation. The last administration had no ability to either formulate or execute strategic thinking. And I think Jim would agree with me that their basic methodology was chaos. And this is one of the challenges now we're facing, is trying to bring some level of clarity to the chaos they created, as well as speak truth to power and try to understand what we need to do. The bottom line here is that and Pete, Jim, and I have worked on a project to advise senior members of DoD. Within the context of that project, we recognized in our work that everything is linked. You cannot simply address Qatar without understanding what effects are going to happen on Iran and North Korea. It's all related. So I think we have to break down and establish, if you will, a vision for which we want to achieve. We have to understand where we want to go before we can get anyone else to follow us. I think that's where President Trump is somewhat moving now, the idea of a grand strategy, if you will, something we've recognized the need to have. From that grand strategy, then, you can use our allies and like-minded countries to start going against some of these rogue families. We've recognized this in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabian nation doesn't necessarily move with a great deal of clarity of where it wants to go, because you have family interests within the context of that, as we learned during the 9/11 attacks. So within the context of what we can do within the London Center is bring some level of synchronicity, of attempting to understand the levers, as Pete just said. The Qatar and our base, there can be a lever point. One of the things that I've been speaking about a great deal in the media and otherwise is the idea of building on General Joseph Dunford's, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, successful strategy of by, through, and with, the idea of using our allies to carry the heavy lifting within the context of our ability. Going back to the Turks for a second, one of the things that the Turks, I think you would agree with this idea that the Turks may have aspirational interests of having great influence, but without the logistical support of a military such as ours, it's all without real ability. 3,000 troops left to their own devices without heavy airlift. Everything else is simply a fodder for terrorist attack. So I think we have to recognize that as much as people will talk big, their ability to follow through is completely lacking. We still have the ability to do these great things. They do not. And with that said, we now have a president who's willing to do great things with our military where the other one was not. So I think we have to recognize there's a balance to be had between military strength and clear and concise thinking about objectives. One of the things about the Reagan era, and our fellow friend Bud McFarlane is one of the folks who've been influencing and informing our thinking, is the idea of trying to be very clear with our allies, working very swiftly and directly with those who wish to help us. And again, stability should be the focus. One of the things we have put forth as an idea to help both focus the region on what's important, as well as counter the Iranian influences and expansion and aspirations, is something called the Gulf and Red Sea Treaty Organization, GRSTO, an Arab NATO. This Arab NATO concept does essentially lack the Article 5 element for any number of political reasons, which we can talk about in more detail if necessary, but I think people recognize simply trying to build on this tapestry of capability that Joe Dunford and Joe Votel have been able to build within the context of the coalition that we now have facing ISIS. We need to actually move that into the realm of civil military. And I would ask you all to remember the fact that we have trained every Middle Eastern military for the past 30 years. Military academies, they all go to our schools. General al-Sisi, President al-Sisi, Field Marshal al-Sisi is a graduate of the Army War College. And one of our senior fellows, Tony Kukula, was former commandant there, and we talked in great detail about how important it was for, I believe, then Colonel al-Sisi to become educated to understand how we work as a military. And this is one of the reasons we proposed politically, I don't know how this will go over with folks, that Egypt should play a major role in whatever we do regarding a Gulf and Red Sea Treaty Organization based on the understanding of our two nations and where we want to go. So simply put, I see the Qatar thing as but one more indicator that we must first and foremost define our own strategic vision for the region, try to clarify what we wish to achieve, and then go about organizing our allies and our friends in such a way to understand that we must look at the whole to understand how to affect this one element. And then at the same time, bring military clarity and capability to the region that will be effective in going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other threats which are clearly there. And the third point would have to be combining them both together to defeat the ideology of radical Islam. I did a rant over the weekend on my Facebook talking about the fact that as much as we have religious groups within our own country with extreme views, the Amish are not going to be sending out jihadists to attack the White House because people drive cars and not horse and buggies. So it's not an issue of radicalism or extremism. The issue is obviously there's an element of Islam which has become completely cancerous and is out to destroy everything, to include other elements of Islam. I cite for you very quickly a meeting I had, that Bud McFarlane and I had with General al-Tohimi back in 2013, who was then the chief of Egyptian intelligence. And he said clearly, says, I am a loyal member of the Islamic faith, but we have to understand there are elements within our own faith which wish to destroy us and the faith. And he cited for us the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, I think, the underlying problem that has been infecting the entire region. So this is where I think we must, enemy is, understand the tools we have to deal with that enemy, and go about working with individuals, groups, to have an established vision which they share that we can move forward to address.
I want to open it up to questions, comments, arguments.
Yeah, I would like to comment if I may. I agree with everything you've said. And I think you have put a framework around that. You went through a point that I want to come back to, which you said work with our allies to create the necessary capability to move forward on the overall objectives. But when I look at the facts, I don't see, for example, with Egypt, I'll take Egypt as an example, military financing, which has been stopped under the Obama administration, and how it comes back, the Bright Star. All these things have come to a standstill, and I think it should be the other way around. There needs to be much more cooperation in these areas. There needs to be extensive dialogue and openness, and in my sort of view, it can be done. The meeting between President Trump and President Sisi, the chemistry was there, but I don't see the material sort of detailed operational implementation, either on the economic or on the political or on the social. I mean, in my view, you said something which is critical. When President Sisi studied here, it made a huge change. been working on for a long time, unsuccessfully, is being able to have an educational initiative, democracy and human rights, without better education. You look at the American University in Cairo, it is a beacon of true education. So in my view, we need to move on sort of parallel sort of initiatives. The military needs to be strengthened, the relationship. Economic also, and we're not talking about grants, we're talking about economic cooperation that is fruitful for both the United States and Egypt. And then also look at other initiatives. None of that still has been from the goodwill at the presidential level.
If I could address it, I've said publicly, we need to bring back an enhanced Bright Star. It's both a method of team building and regional cooperation. One of the reasons I think we're most effective in the Gulf War '91 is because we have been exercising with the Egyptian Army and others to understand how to execute command and control effectively. And with that, then I think also becomes education understanding. So one of the things I would offer up, and this is a public offer, we should look at a way to bring in Tony Kukula, former commandant of the Army War College. The idea should be is we could potentially use a military institution such as the War College or other places to create the conditions for a discussion of this sort. And I think that's something we should seek, is to have essentially a series of meetings and panels on Capitol Hill to talk about how the policy at the top, President Trump's policy, has not been translated well into the military. And I think we should engage the Pentagon on this very issue. Let's remember, we have to be a bit patient with the Pentagon by the fact that people are still not there who are going to have to be executing these policies. So I think if we can be there ahead with good ideas, which the Pentagon can pick up and use in it, I think this would be very effective for both sides.
If I could just jump in for a second, is part of the reason why we keep pounding the desk on the GRSTO is we see the GRSTO as a framework to do these very things, is to not only expand our relationship in real operations, but also in training and exercises in development of new capabilities across the region, of integrating these forces in their various capabilities to achieve, synergistic outcomes. But and then take that framework and move beyond that to, economic relationships, other political relationships, social relationships. So the GRSTO starts as if you will, it's the toe in the door to all of those things you're talking about. And every time we have this discussion on the GRSTO, we keep coming back to, this is a great place to start, because we have people who understand that relationship right up front. And we can look at something like NATO and say, they did it over there, it worked really well. Why can't we do that here and do this very same thing? So in complete agreement, I think that the issue that we have at hand here is someplace to start at GRSTO. Now the other piece of it, as Tony just said, the issue of getting the DoD started, there's an in-house thing here, and that is getting our budgets right, because we're severely constrained as to how we're spending our money right now. So we have our own, inside the house, inside the lifelines here, issue that we need to get that budget process squared away, so we can start getting some extra money to start doing these essentially new things, redoing old things.
I can tell you this, and I was just on the Hill yesterday having meetings. With this GRSTO, we've been working for the past year and a half or so, maybe even longer, probably with 2 years now, Tony,
Right.
with Ed Royce and Foreign Affairs. And Congressman, you know that how these things work as well. So we're in the process of the debate, as Pete was referring to funding, the debate between Foreign Affairs and these are obviously complicated or complex issues, I guess. I mean, it's complicated. I don't know if they're complex, but the question is how to get this done. I can tell you that both Foreign Affairs and Armed Services in Congress, both in the House and the Senate, they like this GRSTO. I think it's a great idea. Now we're basically haggling over price and whose obligation it is. I think that this is something that clearly we see, we meaning the United States, sees as a prime opportunity to cover all the bases. The question is just how we get there.
We're gonna have to give up on the Mexicans paying for it.
I agree.
Makes sense. Nationwide makes sense.
I think Bright Star will be resumed this October, so just a comment, because I believe they will restart again, maybe not the same scale as in before, but it will be resumed this year. So that is at least one step forward in terms of the Egyptian-American relationship.
Good enough. I think that's something we should build on as a start point, though. And obviously, there's been discussions. Mr. Trump brought up the concept of the Gulf and Red Sea Treaty Organization during his speech in Saudi Arabia. We all believe that the discussion shifts around capability more than political expediency. And that, therefore, because of this sort of thing, we see the Egyptians as the most key element of the military relationships factor in this. I'm saying this because it's my observation. My colleagues may or may not agree with me. The Egyptians have shown the greatest propensity to being an effective military within the region. There is a war going on in the Gaza. People don't seem to understand it, and this is one of the things we wanted to bring more attention to. The fact that Egypt is the front line of the war on terror. People are dying every day, and this is where it's been most disappointing from our perspective to see our government, Congress, supporting the previous White House on cutting off military support, the Apache helicopters and other things during a time when we knew there was a war going on. So this is something we're very passionate about based on my understanding of who the enemy really is. We have radical Islam. We see radical Islam. Your nation, the Egyptians, are battling radical Islam on a daily basis. Through that battle, they actually gain a great deal of experience. And that's why I think we should continue to expand our military cooperation effectively within the region, leading with the Egyptians.
But the Egyptians, they've always had this leadership role in the Middle East,
Precisely.
In the Arab world until very recently. So it's important to get them on board. But one of the problems here is that still, it seems that the United States there is no clear vision and policy towards the Middle East. So many things are changing, but the policy is still very old policy of previous government, which was a fiasco. So
Fiasco is a very good
especially in Iraq and Syria, it wasn't good.
It's Naro Zagros is a senior vice president of Soran University in Erbil, and one of the concerns that and Naro and I have spoken about this. I'm going to use Kurdistan as an example, or Iraq as an example of the concerns that we have, and I know it was mentioned that how long is this taking us? Let's speed this process up. Part of the issue that we face is our DoD, State Department, and so on isn't fully staffed, and many of them are holdovers are still from the previous administration. One of the concerns that Nara expressed to me was that if you take a look at U.S. policy in Iraq, you have the Shia in the south, which is in essence Iran, and you have the Kurds in the north and the Sunnis in the middle, who have no resources or anything of that nature. And what is in essence happening is just recently the Russians, or Putin, made a $3 billion investment into Kurdistan. So if we can't get our agencies in order and fully staffed, what's going to ultimately happen is we'll have Iran in the south, we'll have the Russians in the north who are working with the Iranians in the south, and any movement that we hope to have in Iraq is a problem. And I say that it's not just with Egypt, it's not just with certain allies that we're dragging our feet on. This is an issue that we see across the board. It's just a thought.
It's not a thought. It's a very serious concern.
Right.
If I am not an American, but I care very much for the United States as much as my country, and I think a number of your policies, not only on the Middle East, but other areas too.
Exactly.
Ellie, what was the investment that Putin put into Kurdistan? No, what was it for?
Oil.
Well,
Yeah.
that's just really dandy. Sarcasm.
I got that. But, thoughts?
You were talking earlier about oil. And of course, you all know that the gas find between Iran and Qatar is shared by both of them, according to official agreement. And gas prices are not impacted as much as oil prices.
Right.
And as you in your comments indicated, Qatar has huge financial resources. They have the highest per capita income. They have huge financial resources that they utilize. I witnessed personally just 2 weeks ago in Berlin how they influenced the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany to act on their behalf in Saudi Arabia and in Abu Dhabi.
Right.
So this is ongoing. I mean, they have investments and huge investments in the UK, huge investments in France, in Germany, and they're using those countries in a big way to play a role in trying to break that existing coalition that is putting the boycott or sanctions on.
Right.
I think that gas and increased production and lower gas prices are not something that we need to move away from. Indeed, gas is such a great feedstock to produce other transportation fuels, such as not only gas itself in big vehicles, but to produce methanol with an M, for example. There's just a lot one can do to use gas and fuels derived from gas to keep pressure on the price of oil. And politically, at least I think, our major leverage here on both Iran and Russia, and maybe ultimately Venezuela if they ever get part of their act together, is to keep, it's not so much where it's imported from as it is the price.
Right.
And if we can keep the price of oil down there in the 30s, even high 30s, we have more leverage over even Iran and certainly over Russia, I think, than we could imaginably have using any other tool. I was negotiating the Conventional Forces of Europe treaty in 1989 when the Berlin Wall collapsed. I tell you, you have never seen such nice Russians. Oh, they were sweethearts. We had a great time. I'd take them out to dinner. I'd put on Soviet-American barbecues at my diplomatic residence. They were easy to get along with. It was just terrific. I'd been in 3 other negotiations with them when they'd been typical Russians, and once some major weakness shows itself to them, one could hope that there will be some very important movements, and I think, frankly, relatively low oil prices, down below 40, will be something that could redound to the rest of the world's benefit, and particularly those countries that are being leaned on one way or another by Russia.
Hey, to follow on Jim's point, I thought President Trump's speech in Poland talking about supporting the Europeans' energy independence was a key factor, and I think that was essentially a weaponization of economic fact that I think we should explore by the fact that I think we can become a net producer of energy. And the other thing Jim and I would agree on, I think, is that we are now trying to work to make solar and other alternate power sources more sustainable and required. And let me be clear on this, just as kind of an aside. One of the things that I think we need to understand is that in any crisis, major crisis, you could see the diminution of the availability of petroleum-based products. So therefore, having some level of renewable resource you can fall to use is a good idea.
Or natural gas.
Or natural gas, something that you can fall back to. I don't believe on ever depending on a single source. With that said, though, I think President Trump has been very much willing to explore the idea, not because of global warming, but because there are practical reasons for looking at power and energy from the strategic perspective as a means of using it to sustain our ability to project our national will is something I think we should actually discuss in more detail, because the energy piece of this becomes key and critical to the Middle East component. Even if we become net exporters, it doesn't change the fact that the Chinese, for example, are hugely and completely dependent on the Middle East supply, which means that they have a huge vulnerability.
In fact, the Chinese are now importing, I think, 100,000 barrels a day to the United States.
Yep.
So it's,
We have to also become
there's a
less
lot of other places to get. I'm
beyond
sorry.
solar, though. We need to utilize our coal resources and also nuclear. Because right now our electrical grid is at a severe threat from any type of attack from an enemy. Just this weekend, 140,000 Los Angeles people were without electricity when one of the enormous transformers was blown out, and they have no idea how that happened. And what would essentially happen right now, and a lot of people are very concerned, and they've been pushing this, that the United States is very vulnerable to its electrical grid being attacked. The Iranians basically have that capability. And if that goes down, we don't have anything. And solar, the higher the temperatures go, your solar actually shuts down, reduce energy. So it's something about those platforms, or just get too hot or whatever. So, coal and nuclear are options, but, that environmental left has really bastardized both of those, and yet they are such an easy, affordable resource for the United States. But that's just my 2 cents on that.
Again, you hear here for coal.
Yes,
The point about the vulnerability is very well taken. And it's vulnerable not only to guys with AK-47s outside Silicon Valley 3 years ago, nearly knocking out Silicon Valley's electricity, the Metcalf. But it's vulnerable to cyber, and it's vulnerable to electromagnetic pulse, whether that comes from a high altitude nuclear detonation or from the sun. And the solar predictions are about once every 12 years, and we're overdue to have an extremely large solar event. So,
In fact, so we just missed one.
we just barely missed one.
It's just, what, 2 or 3 years ago?
About 2 months, 2-3 months ago.
3 months ago, yeah.
There's just a lot that needs to be done to fix the electric grid and put a lot more resilience into it, and it's urgent. And I think spend some time and effort.
Let me just pivot back for a moment to the Gulf Red Sea Treaty Organization. I'm going to ask Pete. We're talking about who should take the lead on this, and of course, I always, when I talk to people about the Gulf Red Sea Treaty Organization, I compare it to the makeup of the European Union, in the sense that everybody needs to have a headquarters because nobody wants to feel left out. But the question becomes, who in the Middle East is Brussels? Which country is that? We've been talking about Egypt taking the lead. What's the difference between Egypt taking the lead and, let's say, Saudi Arabia? Why would we lean more towards Egypt than this?
Well, the easiest answer is that Middle East force. Our terms here. The Middle East force is going to be very heavily weighed in favor of its ground component. The ground component, the army, is going to have to be, if you will, the center of mass of the capability of the force. And there's no question that the only country that can occupy that position is Egypt. Egypt has to be the main contributor to the ground force, because there are 85 million Egyptians, is that right?
90
90 million. I mean, meanwhile, you have, the population of Saudi Arabia is 28 million, of which half of them are not Saudis. So there's no way the Saudis can do this. The Saudis have great capabilities. The Saudis need to play a leading role. How exactly we work that out, that's going to have to be worked out around the table with Saudis and Egyptians and other folks sitting at the table arguing with each other. Everybody has a role, but the center of mass of any kind of military organization, military-centric organization in the Middle East is going to be a ground force, and the ground force has to be led by the Egyptians.
When the Egyptians were here, though, they said the reason that they weren't able to be the lead was because of revenue, and the Saudis had that revenue. The debt they have is
Right,
overwhelming.
but everybody has to play. I mean, and part of the thing that the Saudis are going to have to initially, while the Egyptian, part of this process is beyond the military is growing the Egyptian economy, and so as well as other, member states' economies, and before we get there, there's going to need to be support from the countries that can afford it. UAE, part of what they're going to contribute is, this is Pete O'Brien's take on the world, is they're going to have to contribute, if you will, some of the monetary support to get to organize this thing, get it going, keep it supported, because you still need those Egyptian bodies. You need the Egyptian soldiers. So the Egyptians are going to need to play as the center of the ground force, and the Saudis are going to need to, at some point in here, some people are going to pay more than others. Some people are going to contribute more bodies than others. I think that's good too.
How does that differ then from forming the Arab coalition, which was also something that this administration and previous administration had discussed openly, and nothing really seems to move forward because at some point the Saudis didn't want to make it happen.
My take on it is it requires that the U.S. side make clear to everybody that we are going to be a permanent part of the coalition. We're going, the United States is going to show up. We're going to give, we're going to contribute logistics capabilities. We're going to contribute command and control capabilities and the actual systems and integration. We're going to contribute intelligence capabilities. But everybody brings pieces to the table. Some people are going to be contributing more money than they're going to be contributing soldiers. Some people will be contributing more soldiers, more aircraft. The UAE has a great small air force. It's a small air force, but it's very capable. Well, the UAE has to be a key component of the air side of this thing. So everybody has to bring pieces. I think the reason why it has stalled before, I see two things. One is the command and control issue, which I think is where the Americans need to stand up and say, we're here, we're going to be here, everybody's going to play, everybody gets to see, if you will, under the blanket, gets to see all of what we're bringing. The second thing is, I think, there's a natural reticence among nations, and it's among all nations, about sharing information, sharing intelligence. So the role the Americans need to play is we be the clearinghouse of the intelligence. So we make sure that everybody has the common picture, and don't get into a situation where we're expecting, one Arab nation to be giving to another Arab nation, if you will, without recognizing that there are existing anxieties about doing that. Have the Americans act as a clearinghouse so that those anxieties are tamped down until everybody becomes familiar with it. After a generation doing this, it's going to be a whole lot easier than it's going to be in the first 5 or 10 years.
If I could follow on to what Pete's saying, right now we have a number of effective bilateral relationships. These sort of things exist where we will talk to an Arab nation, we'll share, but as Pete said, that sharing they may not be comfortable sharing with other Arab nations. So one of the methods we've actually used to build capacity and partnership is something called joint warrior interoperability exercises. And we actually did it with the Five Eyes for no reason, because we all work together already. But we've done these global exercises where you basically kind of put everybody in a bag, shake them all up, and make them go sit in other places. I was actually deployed to New Zealand to be part of the New Zealand contingent working this issue. So why not send an Egyptian to work in a Saudi center or vice versa? Something where you start building this ability during exercises, just so people get used to it, of getting people in the same room, talking and working together. Because culturally speaking, I think once you learn to trust at that level, you start wishing for and expanding into a more formal relationship. So there's no reason to believe you can do it all at once. But there's ways we've done things before to build capacity and build partnerships.
And once the leadership sees it, once the president of the various member nations see these processes going on, and see lieutenant colonel from this country, all working together and producing something real. It happened 2 and 3 and 4 times in a row. They're going to get it. They're going to buy in. No one buys in right away, though. I agree. No one buys in right away. There's always going to be a hesitancy to buy in. Seeing all these guys working together, it's gonna click.
You think that should replace the idea of the Arab
Yes, absolutely.
coalition?
Yes.
No doubt,
Yes.
because it hasn't worked. Well, I'm one of those who
So
believes.
this is more boutique. This is more small or
No, larger.
This is larger.
This is the whole idea of an Arab coalition working on its own is not functional. So therefore, right.
NATO is named for a geographic area in the North Atlantic. This is, Bristow is named for a geographic area, not a people. I think we ought to operate on the basis of what we're doing here is slowly and carefully and with all the appropriate sensitivities to the history and background and cultures and all of that, establishing a Bristow and turning it into a Middle Eastern NATO.
Right.
Now, obviously, there are things that are hard to do. That Article 5, I'm not quite sure how that would sit in Bristow, but that is something I'll remember to say, Article 5. I personally believe that any organization of this sort needs at some point relatively early on to face the issue of bringing Israel in. And I think Israel ought to be part of it. And I was talking to a Saudi not too long ago. I said if Israel should decide to go after the nuclear program in Iran, he was a retired fighter pilot. I said, would you want an Israeli wingman? He said, absolutely. I think we need to think through that set of issues. But if this is a geographic alliance, and I think it should be, it does have to be sensitive to people's backgrounds and culture and all of that. But it's a bit easier now to fold the Saudis in with what the new Crown Prince looks like he's doing than it, I think, would have been several years ago. I was over for the Navy as Undersecretary in '78 in Saudi for several weeks working on a gunboat program, and spent some time in Saudi naval officers' homes for dinner and so forth. It was like being in Jordan. I mean, people were relaxed about what their wives were wearing, whether there was a glass of wine that some people would have for dinner. The things that are jihad worthy to a Wahhabi were relaxed about. And I think that we want to take note of the fact that it looks like maybe the Saudis are beginning to come out a bit from the several decades of Wahhabi domination. And if so, it gives us I think, a very good opportunity to begin to work with them and Israel and several other states, certainly Egypt, of course, and a key role, in a way that we probably could not have done 10 years ago.
The Saudis, just on a lighter note, the Saudis lately are beginning to actually reach out to people to organize concerts and musical.
Yeah.
I, in fact, have a couple of friends there from the royal family who simply reached out a few months ago and asked to put together a couple of these concerts. And one of the requirements was actually to bring in even female singers from, America and Britain, and they were even talking about people like, they're going about it a little slowly, so they're still thinking, Gloria Gaynor, sort of people of the 80s, just to not shock the system altogether.
Right.
And the man said, we will eventually get to Madonnas and other. Let's first start with the 80s.
Ambassador, I would like to ask you, the Iranian influence, which is so critical in Qatar. Maybe I misunderstood, but I had gotten the impression that the Iranians were trying to send in troops into Qatar to protect the palace. What kind of what kind of stronghold do they have on them? And is Qatar going to be able to sever that umbilical cord that they have?
Good question. I don't know. We probably have people at the table who know a good deal more about that interaction than I do.
Do you know, Peter, what their level of commitment is?
I don't know. I know that there are small numbers of folks from the RNGC and from the Ministry of Defense who come in and out of the country, but I don't know. I couldn't tell you on a bet what the
I guess what
numbers
I'm
are.
getting at is why is it so hard for them to just say, okay, we're going to acquiesce and not fool around with these guys anymore? I mean, I'm doing it very layman terms here, but
Well,
what is their
Because it
commitment?
reduces their ability to influence.
Right.
Don't forget the United States, I'll give you one simple example. The United States interacted with Taliban through Qatar.
Okay.
That gave them the strength. That's the role they played. And that they want to maintain that. They
The
don't want
next
to
thing
lose
you
it.
know, we'll be doing deals with the Muslim Brotherhood then.
We did deal
We
with.
did, we were.
Oh,
That's
that's
what
true.
Woolsey
Never
did.
mind, I'm sorry, what am I thinking here?
The Gulf deal was done through Qatar.
That's
The
true.
strange thing is, and right now, Iranians and Turks are investing in Qatar, and these two forces, they hate each other. They are in battle with each other for decades and centuries. But
Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, the problem is, if there is going to be a coalition in the Middle East and the Arab world, and if we expect one of these countries to lead this coalition, it's going to fail. And Egypt can do that, but maybe in the future, not right now, because it's entangled with several problems, internal problems, trying to solve the problem in Sinai, beefing up their security, winning the hearts and minds of its own people, and yet they have economic problems and they lack resources to do that. But we have examples in the first Gulf War when we had this Arab alliance, Middle Eastern alliance against Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. It worked because it was led by the United States. And any coalition in the future, if it's not led by the United States, it's going to fail.
But
Yeah, we had for 4 years, 3 years and 8 months, from 1941 to 1945, we were the close ally of a man who at that point had killed more people than anyone in human history, Joseph Stalin. And Roosevelt called him Uncle Joe, and we were glad to have him because we needed him to defeat the Nazis. And that Eastern Front was blessed from all of us in the West. Sometimes you got to work with folks in something like this that you'd rather not, or that maybe there's some alternative or something, but sometimes you need to.
Absolutely. And I think going back to your point, there's an opportunity to bring Israel on board. Because we know that Israelis and Saudis are talking to each other, maybe behind closed doors, but they are talking to each other. There is another, thinking about an alliance against all the external problems that is coming from the Shia world.
Well,
So there is an opportunity for that. But, I think to expect Arabs to come together and find a lead among themselves to lead the battle, it's going to fail. And there's a infamous, if not famous, talk about Gaddafi, and that is Arabs only agree with each other to disagree with each other. So, you will end up in a catch-22 position.
But that's why the American position for the Gersto has to be that, if you will, to use a phrase, and probably maybe I shouldn't use it, but the U.S. would function, at least initially, as the first among equals. The United States would provide the necessary leadership where and when necessary, as the Egyptian army develops the capabilities to take the leadership, until the UAE Air Force or the Saudi Air Force or the Jordanian Special Forces, as they develop over time in this integrated force structure, as they develop their not only the actual capabilities of the forces, but the leadership capabilities for those forces, then they can start stepping up into those leadership roles in the organization. With the U.S. always remaining on hand, essentially, as in fact a full member of the organization, the U.S. needs to be the leadership of the organization at every turn. And as other folks develop those capabilities, they would fill in around.
Like we've seen in Europe in the 90s, the Europeans tried fecklessly to try to stabilize Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Right.
It wasn't until America stepped in and said, this is how we're going to do it, did it happen? And I think it was a glaring illustration of how the Europeans, with all of the, will respond to fight each other before they will fight a common enemy, unless someone kind of helps unify and focus them. And let me say, that's why this parallels what we're doing. We've also got a concept called NATO 2.0 we're working to reinvigorate NATO. Same issue there. I don't know how many of you have studied the concept of the EU army, which is parallels the Arab army concept. Can you imagine politicians with their own armies? I mean, that's what they're talking about here. And
That's
I think
what happened to the Roman Republic.
yeah. There you go. What else needs to be said? But so this is where I think the idea of having someone who, as a service of common concern, focuses on the regional issues. How do we secure the region? How do we make conditions for all these nations to work together? And I think we must lead with security to create conditions for economic success and prosperity. So I think this is the way to go to do that. And again, we've seen this in Europe a time or two before as well. So
There are a couple of news, just going back to the Qatari issue. One is, I think the US had signed this optimization of counterterrorism agreement with Doha, I think maybe yesterday or today. And there's also news about, I guess, a meeting tomorrow in Jeddah for the Arab Quartet to, I think, look into what people are saying, that there is a Tillerson proposal, which kind of surfaced. And it was interesting, actually. The Russians were the one who put it on, I think, RT, and then it kind of disappeared the day after. It was a proposal based on 5 points where Doha will deport Qaradawi and key members of the Muslim Brothers, close down the rest of the Hamas base, and asked the Turkish to pull out the recent troops they've sent, and also to stop the enticement against Egypt, Saudi, Emirates, and Bahrain from Jazeera, not close it down, just to stop the enticement. And I think put some more screw on the financial transactions of Doha to ensure that money is not going anywhere to fund terrorist organizations or any of their cells. That proposal, seemed to just surface for a day. I asked some people, they said it was not exactly that. There was nothing that the Secretary Tillerson would put in writing anyway, because they didn't want to, put anything that is documented to become responsible for it. But it seems like with his visit to Kuwait yesterday, with all these news going on, it seems like something is happening. Can anybody maybe enlighten me or enlighten the rest on what's going on?
the only thing
I have nothing new.
the only thing I can is somewhat speculative. You mentioned earlier a little bit about the deal that the Obama administration cut with Qatar on Taliban and the Bird Gulf. Congress opened an investigation, I'm not sure where it was at, on the supposed transaction behind the scenes where Qatar was paid in a number of ways, not potentially, for the Qatar support with the Taliban. We're talking about billions of dollars of pledges related to the Obama administration's pledge to Qatar for certain resources and support that was brokered behind the scenes by John Kerry.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
Which one specifically on Qatar or?
Yeah, with Qatar and potential Tillerson and his.
In fact, I just so now, I'm sorry because it's interesting, that Tillerson actually is apparently going to attend the meeting tomorrow.
I don't know.
Again, I don't know if the source is correct, but.
Our concern is that we don't want to jump out ahead of things because of the internal politics. From what I gather, and this is limited knowledge, obviously, what I'm hearing is that it's more likely to blow over, and that we don't. I guess what we don't want to do any permanently damaging actions or things like that ahead of allowing the other Gulf states to work it out with Qatar, if that makes sense. Now, again, I don't know. Maybe we're being too cautious on that, but.
If I may, and I apologize that I have to sort of leave in a few minutes, but if I may, before I leave, United States position versus Iran and the sanctions were very effective. It is concerning if the United States does play a role to act the boycott that exists right now without Qatar moving on some key issues. I think we lose the game. In my view, unless the United States continues to support it, not necessarily creating permanent damage, as you mentioned, but holding what we have today in place, having a clear policy in support of fighting terrorism and making sure that the issues that Qatar is undertaking, and I personally believe to a large extent acting as a front for Iran. Unless we don't, if the United States backs off and the strong Gulf alliance with Egypt breaks, I think we'll all pay a price, a heavy price.
I think Iran is the enemy.
Yes.
Qatar is a factor that has to be assessed here.
And if I, just to clarify, I think that's kind of what I was trying to get at, was that it seems like the Gulf states are acting appropriately and holding Qatar accountable. And I don't know if, from our position, it seems like doing too much without the deconflicting with the Gulf states would muddy the waters and quite possibly make things worse rather than help.
But let me tell you the perception from the other side of the coin, from the Middle East. We see two things. We see Secretary Tillerson saying something, and we see the president saying something else. And that's fine. We can understand that, and that works, and that's part of the present sort of policy. But again, I would underline significantly, if the United States does pressure Egypt or the countries involved to break and not continue to put Qatar accountable for what it's doing, I think it would be very, very negative for everyone.
Why are we continuing to sell arms to Qatar, the U.S.?
It's good business.
F-15 Tomahawks. Reached an announcement of approval of those sales. Appear to be going forward. I'm having a problem.
What is more surprising is not only that, I mean, you all know, the Qatari military, how big it is and how effective it is. I mean, the goods go maybe elsewhere or used.
Yeah, it's like a waste station on black market. No, I'm with you.
If I may comment on the ambassador's suggestion bringing Israel in, I think we all know very well that the big elephant in the room has to be addressed first before Israel is part of any Arab coalition, and that's the Israeli-Palestinian issue, which is one of the moving parts of all this. Greenblatt's over there as we speak. Maybe there is something going on, but we know the game is being played there on both sides, and all sides rather, in the lack of leadership. But until that's addressed, I really think you're dreaming about bringing Israel on board any Arab coalition. Yes, Israel would love it, but it's kind of like they want to win the lottery without buying a ticket. And you've got to make a concession on the big elephant in the room before you can participate therein.
They are the most effective military force in the Middle East.
I don't disagree.
And they're the only democracy. And I think you got to figure out a way to work in it. It isn't easy. I completely agree.
Okay.
Let's use the Lebanon example. We got Sunni and Shia government formed there that's working together in Christian, and no fighting for a change in the country of Lebanon.
For a while, it's true.
And there's some unholy alliances there fighting ISIS.
Until Hezbollah puts its sneakers on and starts.
But I would agree with Shafiq's comment that not just the perception in our countries, but I think also the perception by the Qataris themselves that the conflicting presidential tweet and State Department statements, I think has.
I go with tweet.
Yeah.
I think that's by design. This is an unconventional president who's going to continue to do that rather than everybody being on the same page.
Interesting. You say that, Tony. The Qataris have said to some of their friends that some American friends told us here forget the tweet, just listen to what Tillerson says. So they're actually confused. We're confused. Everybody's confused. So should we follow tweets? Should we follow statements? Which one to follow? I think the crisis when it started, I think the countries were really nervous, and there was maybe a possibility to see some change. But then I think quickly, because of that conflicting messages, tweets, no tweets, which one do I follow? And I think quickly then they were able to regain the momentum and then relax back again, and then get the German to say something, get the British to say something. And now we're back to square one. Everybody in this room and other rooms know that the Qataris are funding. I mean, why are you signing with them the counterterrorism measure? Because there are issues. So everybody knows the Qataris have been doing stuff. But now we're kind of going back and saying, well, let's leave the crisis to, float itself. So I think we're sending wrong signals, if I'm not.
The entertainment capital of the world used to be on the west coast of the United States. It has, I'm afraid, migrated to the east coast.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the people that are very, very loyal and devoted to President Trump, who elected him, that's what we need to remember. Tillerson was not elected. President Trump was elected. And although they've sent conflicting messages, I would always recommend to adhere to what the president wants, because many of the people that are close to the White House have been advising the president to stop his support staff, so to speak, his secretaries, from sending these conflicting messages that are even conflicting with his very campaign promises. He's going through this with DHS right now, with a lot of the illegals issues with the children, and they're accommodating all this stuff. But even with Secretary Mattis, there's been conflict with the president. And it's very disconcerting because, trust me, by the time it gets to me and I know about it, a lot of people know about it. Because I'm hearing it from the really reliable source who's connected to the really reliable source. I'm like the fourth cousin over here, but I'm not off in Indiana knowing nothing. It suggests that the president's tweet may not be taken quite always so literally because he's very impulsive, but at the same time, he was the man elected to office and not Tillerson. And at any given moment, I fully believe that President Trump, should it be needed, will turn around and tell these people to get in line.
You think that, I'm totally with you, but I guess the issue is, I think the Qataris are, and have been, by the way, for a while, under this, I think, misguided, perception that just don't worry about the tweet.
They've gotten a pass for so long until they get actually backhanded very severely. They're not going to recognize that anything's changed. They've been given a pass for how dang long.
Right.
So I don't know that they realize that this is now
They're
dealing with a different man. When the Moab was dropped in Pakistan, that was a huge statement to Syria. It was a huge statement to North Korea. When we did the selective attacks based upon the chemical attack in Syria, that was a serious statement. I think President Trump has taken advantage of these opportunities to lay the law very early in his administration. So the Qataris are gonna see something. I think that they're gonna see something very sincere, very straightforward, so that they can fall in line, because we just can't have that waffling, like you say, between Tillerson and the president. It just really sends mixed signals.